The text came through at 2:47 on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, while I was sitting in a meeting room on the 22nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Calgary, pretending to listen to a presentation about quarterly tax projections. Mr. Halloran, sorry to bother you. I'm in your basement, and there's a door I can't account for. It's behind the cedar shelving unit on the south wall, padlocked from the outside. 3 deadbolts. Did you want me to keep going or wait for instruction? I read it twice, then a third time. The man who sent it was Brendan Foss, a furnace technician from Chinook Heating and Cooling, 54 years old, 26 years in the trade, the kind of man who wears Carhartt and says ma'am without thinking about it. I had hired him 3 days earlier because the furnace in our house on Elbow Drive had started groaning every time it cycled. My wife was in Halifax visiting her sister, supposedly. She left on Sunday and wasn't due back until Friday. I excused myself from the meeting and walked to the stairwell. My hands were shaking by the time I got there, and I didn't know why yet. Or maybe I did. Maybe some part of me had been waiting 18 years to find out something was wrong. I called him. Brendan, it's Desmond. What door? Behind the shelves on the far wall, the ones with the Christmas bins on top. I went down there to trace the cold air return, and there's a clean draft coming through where there shouldn't be one. So I pulled the unit out a bit, and there it is. A door. White hollow core by the look of it, but the frames reinforced. 3 padlocks, 2 master locks, and one of those high-security disc locks. That can't be right. We've lived in this house since 2007. There's no door down there. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Sir, I can hear something on the other side. Sounds like a small fan running, and there's a power cable feeding through the baseboard from the laundry room outlet. Someone has been running electricity into a space your house plan does not show. I told him to step back. I told him not to touch anything. I told him I'd be home in 20 minutes, and I drove the 18 kilometers from downtown to our neighborhood in Britannia in 14, running 2 yellows that were already red. When I pulled into the driveway, Brendan was standing on the front step with his hands in his pockets, looking like a man who'd seen something he didn't want to be a witness to. His van was parked at the curb. The October light was going that flat gray way it does on the prairies before the snow comes, and I remember the wind moving through the spruce trees in the front yard, and I remember thinking, very clearly, that I was about to learn something that would split my life into a before and an after. We went down to the basement together. He had pulled the cedar shelving unit about a foot away from the wall, and there it was, a door, in my own house, a house I had paid the mortgage on for 18 years. A house I had repainted, rewired the upstairs of, replaced the roof on. There was a door in my basement, and I had never seen it. The padlocks were new. The hasps had been screwed into a metal plate that someone had bolted directly into the concrete. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Whoever did this expected the door to stay shut. Should I call the police? Brendan asked. I said yes. Then I said, wait, hold on, because I had just noticed something. The cedar shelves on this unit were the same cedar shelves that had been in our basement since we moved in. My father-in-law had built them as a housewarming gift back in 2007. He had been a Finnish carpenter in Lethbridge before he retired. He died of a stroke in 2014. My wife had cried for 3 days. I had been the one to clear out his workshop, but the brackets holding those shelves to the wall, the steel L brackets, those were new. The screws were not oxidized. The drywall behind where the unit had been pulled out from was a slightly different shade than the rest of the wall. Someone had taken those shelves. The shelves had been moved within the last year, maybe sooner. I told Brendan to go upstairs and wait in the kitchen. I told him I was going to call the RCMP. He looked at me for a long second, the way one tradesman looks at another when he's trying to decide if you're going to do something stupid, and then he nodded and went up the stairs. I called the police. Then I called my brother. My brother's name is Callum. He's 3 years younger than me, lives in Red Deer, works as a paralegal for a personal injury firm. He picked up on the second ring, and I told him what was happening. And he said, Desmond, listen to me. Do not open that door before the police get there. Whatever is behind it, you do not want your fingerprints on it. You do not want to be the person who opened it. Do you understand me? I said I understood. The RCMP arrived 23 minutes later, 2 officers in a marked SUV, and a third in plain clothes about 10 minutes after that. The plainclothes officer was a woman in her early 40s, with gray at her temples, and a face that did not move when she heard the story. Her name was Sergeant Margaret Vasey. She introduced herself, looked at the door, looked at the shelves, looked at me, and said, "Mr. Halloran, do you have a key for any of those padlocks?" I told her I did not. "Has anyone else lived in this house in the past 18 months? Anyone with regular, unsupervised access?" I said only my wife. She wrote that down. They cut the locks, bolt cutters for the master locks, an angle grinder for the disc lock. The grinder threw orange sparks across the concrete floor, and the smell of burning steel filled the basement. When the last lock fell, Sergeant Vasey put on gloves and pulled the door open. It was a room, about 8 feet by 10, bare drywall unfinished, a single bulb hanging from the ceiling on a cord, a camp cot against one wall with a sleeping bag on it, a bucket, a small electric heater, empty water bottles, a few protein bar wrappers, and in the corner, a duffel bag. There was no one inside, but there had been. Recently. Sergeant Vasey crouched beside the duffel bag and unzipped it with the back of her pen. Inside was a wallet, a passport, a Nokia flip phone, and a folded sheet of paper. She lifted the wallet out and opened it. "Mr. Halloran," she said, "do you know a woman named Annika Thorvaldsen?" I said the name back to her. Annika Thorvaldsen. I had never heard it before in my life. I told her so. She showed me the driver's license. A woman about 50, blonde hair going silver, blue eyes, a Saskatchewan address. The kind of face you'd see in a grocery store and not look at twice. "This woman has been reported missing for 16 days, Sergeant Vasey said, out of Saskatoon. Her family filed the report on October 12th. She was last seen leaving a Tim Hortons on 8th Street East at approximately 7:40 inches the morning." I sat down on the bottom step of the basement stairs because my legs would not hold me anymore. She kept going. The passport was Annika Thorvaldsen's. The flip phone had 3 numbers in its contacts, none of them saved with names. The folded sheet of paper was a printed-out itinerary for a flight from Calgary to Frankfurt on November 14th. A one-way ticket. In Annika Thorvaldsen's name. There were also strands of blonde hair on the pillow of the cot, long, silver-streaked, the same color as the woman in the license photo. Sergeant Vasey looked at me. "Mr. Halloran, when does your wife come home from Halifax?" That was when I understood. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. I drove to a hotel in Eau Claire that night. I told the police I would not be staying in the house. I checked into a Sandman Suites under my own name, paid with my own card, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time without taking my coat off. My wife's name is Bridget Halloran, née McAlpine. We met at a friend's wedding in Banff in October of 2006, married in May of 2007, bought the Britannia house in August of that same year. She is 49 years old. She works as a pediatric speech-language pathologist at a private practice in the Beltline. She was, until that afternoon, the person I trusted most in the world. I called her from the hotel room at 8 in the evening. She picked up on the 3rd ring, and her voice was warm and a little tired, and she said, "Hi, sweetheart, how was your day?" The same way she'd said it for 18 years. I told her the furnace guy had found a problem, and I'd had to leave work early. I told her I was tired. I told her I missed her, and asked how her sister was. She said her sister was fine, that they were going to the harbor for dinner tomorrow, that she'd be home Friday night as planned. I told her I loved her. She told me she loved me too. I hung up the phone and went into the bathroom and was sick into the toilet. Not from the lie, from the precision of it, from the fact that her voice had not wavered, from the fact that she had spent 18 years training her voice not to waver. The next morning I called a private investigator, a man named Roland Beausoleil, recommended by Callum, based out of an office in Inglewood. He was 63, ex-RCMP, and he listened to me describe the situation in his small gray office without changing his expression once. When I was done, he said, "Mr. Halloran, before we go further, I need to ask you something. Do you want to know the truth, or do you want to be safe?" I asked him what the difference was. He said, "If you only want to be safe, we go to the police. You give them everything, you cooperate, and you let the legal process run. That's the safe road. If you want the truth first, you let me work for 2 weeks, and you do not tell your wife anything has happened. You go home, you act normal, and you let me find out what she's really doing. The risk is that she sees through you. The reward is that you understand what she's been planning. You understand the why." I told him I needed both. I needed to be safe, and I needed to know. He said that was possible, but it would require discipline. He said the most important thing was that when she came home Friday, I had to act as if nothing had happened. I had to be the husband she had left on Sunday morning. Brendan, the furnace technician, had already been compensated and asked to keep his findings confidential. The RCMP were aware that I was working with a private investigator and had agreed, given the missing persons connection, to wait 72 hours before making any moves. Sergeant Vasey wanted Annika Thorvaldsen found alive more than she wanted to spook anyone. I went home Thursday night. I cleaned the kitchen. I did the laundry. I refilled the bird feeder my wife liked to watch from the kitchen window. The cedar shelves were back in place in the basement. The door was locked again with new padlocks of the same brand and style as the originals, and the duffel bag, the wallet, the passport, the phone, the itinerary, the strands of hair, all of it had been documented by forensics and returned to the room exactly as found. From the outside, nothing had changed. She came home Friday at 9:15 the evening. I picked her up at the airport. She kissed me at the curb and asked if I'd eaten, and I said I'd waited for her. And we drove home and ordered Vietnamese from the place on 4th Street and ate it on the couch, while she told me about her sister and the harbor and the Atlantic wind. She fell asleep against my shoulder during the second episode of a show we were both half watching. I sat there with her hair on my arm and tried to remember every face she had made that night, every word, every silence. I tried to look at her the way Roland Beausoleil would look at her. She slept beside me for 10 hours. I did not sleep at all. Roland's first report came back on the following Wednesday. Bridget had been to the storage unit twice that week, both times during her lunch break, both times for less than 15 minutes. The storage facility was called Foothills Self-Storage on Blackfoot Trail, and the unit was registered in her maiden name, MacAlpine, which I had not known she was still using for anything. The unit had been rented for 11 months. She paid in cash, in person, on the 1st of every month. He had also pulled the construction permit history for our house. There were no permits filed in our name in the past 3 years. But there had been a private contractor at the house in May, June, and July of last year, while I had been in Vancouver for 10 weeks finishing the McKendrick Tower account. A man named Ronan Voss, who advertised on Kijiji as a discreet renovation specialist. Cash only, no invoices. Roland had spoken to him under the cover of being a prospective client. Ronan Voss had built a sealed room in a basement in Britannia 18 months ago for a woman who paid him $11,000 in 50s and 20s and asked him to forget the address. He remembered the address. Roland's second report came the following Monday. Bridget had a friend named Sauce Maguire, a woman she had known since university. Sauce was a paralegal at a family law firm in Mission. Roland had pulled the firm's public-facing records and found that Sauce had recently begun consulting on cases involving spousal misconduct, criminal injunctions, and protective custody orders. Roland believed Sauce was advising Bridget on the legal architecture of whatever was being planned. Roland's third report was the one that made me understand. Bridget had a life insurance policy on me, a $2 million policy through Manulife, taken out in 2019 with a double indemnity clause for accidental death and an additional rider for death by suspected criminal causes. I had signed the policy. I had not read it. She had brought it home one Sunday afternoon and said it was time we did the responsible thing, and I had signed where the little arrows were because I trusted her. The policy listed her as the sole beneficiary. There was also a man. His name was Tobias Ehrlich. He was a 46-year-old structural engineer who lived in a condo in Bridgeland. He had been seeing Bridget on and off for approximately 4 years. They had met at a continuing education seminar at Mount Royal. They communicated through a second phone she kept in the lining of her work bag, a phone I had never seen, on a number not registered in her name. Roland had photographs. He had call logs. He had a hotel receipt from the Westin in Edmonton from a weekend in February when Bridget had told me she was at a professional development conference in Lethbridge. I sat in Roland's office and looked at the photographs and felt something close down inside my chest. Not a snap, a folding, like a door easing shut. He said, "Mr. Halloran, here is what I believe is happening. Your wife and Mr. Ehrlich have been involved for years. At some point, probably 2 years ago, they began planning. The plan, as I understand it, is this. They locate a missing woman, someone whose disappearance has not yet been widely reported but is real, and they bring her into the room in your basement, under some pretext. Possibly payment, possibly coercion. Annika Thorvaldsen had significant gambling debts. $68,000 to a man in Regina who is not the kind of man you owe money to. Your wife or Mr. Ehrlich likely contacted her with an offer. Hide for 60 days. We'll pay your debt. We'll give you a new start. She agreed. And then? And then, he said, your wife calls a tradesman. A furnace tech, a plumber, an electrician. Someone with no connection to her. The tradesman finds the door. The tradesman calls the police. The police find a missing woman locked in a room in your basement. There is hair on the pillow. There is a duffel bag with her ID. There may even be evidence planted to suggest restraint or assault. You are arrested. You are charged. The trial takes between 18 months and 2 years. During that time, your wife controls the joint accounts. She files for divorce on grounds of criminal conduct. She receives the matrimonial home, half the assets, and full sympathy. If you are convicted, the insurance policy pays out under the rider for criminal causes because the policy defines you as deceased to the marriage. If you are not convicted, you are still ruined, and she leaves you with nothing, and she and Mr. Ehrlich relocate to wherever they have been planning to go. Why didn't Annika just leave the room? Because she was being paid to stay, and because she did not know what was around her. The room had no windows, the door locked from the outside. She was told the homeowner was a violent man and she had to remain hidden until extracted on a specific date. She was scheduled to be moved out, presumably released, on the night of November 13th. The flight to Frankfurt was for the 14th. After the police found you guilty, your wife would have made an anonymous tip leading to Annika's safe recovery, and Annika would have flown to Germany with the rest of her payment and a new identity. I said, "How do you know this?" He said, "Because Annika Thorvaldsen has been cooperating with the RCMP since Tuesday morning. She left the room of her own accord 6 days ago. Mr. Halloran, the night you discovered the door, she was already gone. The hair on the pillow was placed there. The duffel bag was staged. Annika walked out a service door at the back of your house at 3 in the morning, 4 days before your furnace technician arrived. She had begun to suspect she had been lied to. She made a phone call. The RCMP picked her up at a truck stop near Strathmore. She knew. She had begun to know. Sergeant Vasey approached her with the rest of the picture. Annika has agreed to testify. She has signed a statement. She has identified your wife from a photograph and Mr. Ehrlich from another photograph. She has also identified the woman who hired her, a friend of your wife's. I sat in the chair and did not say anything for a long time. He said, "Mr. Halloran, you have a choice now. Sergeant Vasey is prepared to make arrests. I have been authorized to tell you that. But there is also a way to do this where you are present, where you see her face when she understands. I do not recommend it from a legal standpoint. I recommend it from a human one. You decide." I thought about what kind of man I wanted to be on the other side of this. I thought about my father, who had died of pancreatic cancer when I was 26, and who had told me once, in a hospital bed in Lethbridge, that the measure of a man is what he does when no one is watching, and the measure of a marriage is what your wife does when she thinks you cannot see. I had remembered the first half of that sentence many times. I had never, until that afternoon, understood the second. I told Roland I wanted to be present, but I did not want to speak. I wanted to watch. The arrest happened on a Thursday evening, 10 days after I had first read Brendan Foss's text message. Bridget was at our kitchen island, slicing a pear with the small paring knife her mother had given her, when the doorbell rang. I was sitting at the kitchen table, watching her. She walked to the front door in her stocking feet and opened it. Sergeant Vasey was on the step with 2 officers behind her. I heard Vasey say her name. I heard her read the charges. Conspiracy to commit fraud over $5,000. Conspiracy to obstruct justice. Unlawful confinement of Annika Thorvaldsen. Public mischief. Insurance fraud. Conspiracy to wrongfully cause the criminal prosecution of an innocent person, which was a charge I had not known existed until Roland told me. Bridget did not say a word at first. She stood in the doorway in her gray wool socks and looked at Sergeant Vasey, and then she looked past Sergeant Vasey, into the front yard, where the spruce trees were dark against the porch light. Then she turned her head slowly and looked at me, through the doorway, across the entry, into the kitchen. At me. I had been waiting, I realized, for that look for 10 days, maybe longer, Maybe I had been waiting for that look for 18 years and just hadn't known it. She did not look surprised. She did not look afraid. She looked at me with a particular expression that I will spend the rest of my life trying to forget, which was the expression of a person trying to figure out exactly when she had lost, trying to reverse engineer the timeline, trying to identify the moment she had failed to notice that I had stopped being the man she had needed me to be. I did not say anything. I had decided I would not. She was taken out the front door in handcuffs with her socks still on. I watched the cruiser pull away from the curb, and I watched the brake lights disappear down Elbow Drive, and I stood on the porch in the October cold for a long time after they were gone. Tobias Ehrlich was arrested at his condo that same night. Cyrus McGuire was arrested the following morning at her office in Mission. Annika Thorvaldsen testified at the preliminary hearing in February, and she testified at the trial the following October, and Bridget was convicted on 5 of the 7 charges. She is serving 8 years at the Federal Women's Facility in Edmonton. Tobias Ehrlich got 6. Cyrus McGuire got 3. I sold the house in Britannia in the spring after the trial. I did not want to live in a house with a door I had not known about. I bought a smaller place in Bridgeland, a 1920s bungalow with a basement I had inspected with a flashlight before I signed anything. I had it inspected again by a structural engineer. I had every wall sounded for hollows. I am told this is not normal behavior. I am told I will, in time, stop doing it. I do not have a relationship with Bridget anymore. I do not write. I do not visit. Her mother called me once, 6 months after the conviction, and asked me to forgive her daughter. I told her I forgave her in the only way I knew how, which was by not thinking about her, and by not wanting anything from her, and by living my life as if she had never been in it. I do not know if that is real forgiveness. I suspect it is not, but it is what I have. I want to say something to anyone who has watched this story to the end, because there are things I learned in those 10 days, and in the months that followed, that I think are worth saying out loud, even if they are obvious to people who are wiser than I was. The first thing is that the people who love you do not, as a rule, need you to sign documents you have not read. If your spouse is bringing you paperwork and pointing at the line for your signature and saying it is just a formality, take it to a lawyer of your own choosing. Not their lawyer. Yours. I would still be a free man tonight if I had done that in 2019, but I would also be a married man, and I would not know what I know, so I am not sure that I regret the signature as much as I should. The second thing is that a marriage is not a fortress. It is a window. You should be able to see through it in both directions. If you have stopped being able to see in, ask yourself why. If your partner keeps a phone you have never seen, a bag you do not look in, a friend you have never met after 15 years, those are not signs of independence. Those are signs of a separate life. Independence is a closed book on a shared shelf. A separate life is a locked drawer in a room you did not know existed. The third thing is that the people in our trades, the people who fix our furnaces and our roofs and our pipes, see more of our houses than we ever do. Brendan Foss saw a draft I had walked past for 18 years. He saw it because it was his job to see it, and because he was the kind of man who did his job carefully, and because he was not trying to ignore anything. Most of us, in our own homes, in our own marriages, are trying to ignore something. The cost of that ignorance is not always paid in money. And the last thing, the one I think about most, is that I did not get justice that night on the porch. I got an answer. Justice came later, in courtrooms, with judges and juries and lawyers who had spent years learning how to translate suffering into sentences. What I got, standing in my own doorway, was the look on a face I had loved for 18 years. The look of a person realizing she had been seen. That was not justice. That was just the truth, finally arriving, after a long delay. I do not need the last word. I never have. The truth, when it comes, speaks for itself, and the only thing required of you is that you be standing somewhere it can find you. I was. And it did.